for joining me today. I hope everyone is having a lovely start to the new year. Today I wanted to do a little video about the best books I read last year. I made one of these at the start of last year, and I know it's been like so long since I posted on here. When I first made my channel I was just part-time at work, and then like within a couple of weeks I immediately went full-time, so I've just not really had a ton of free time to be filming, but I have still been reading a ton, especially this year. I've read a lot of good stuff, so I did want to share that. And to be honest, some of these books, any chance I get to talk about them, I'm gonna take it, you know? I'm gonna put you guys on to some of these because there's some gems in here. This year I read a mixture of like really anticipated releases that were from authors that I already enjoyed. There's some great like debuts in here as well, and I think some books from authors that I just hadn't picked up before. So it's a good mix of stuff. You know, I was gonna do a top 10, but I think I've actually pulled out 11 books. But yeah, I'm not gonna crop them. I'm not gonna cut anything out because these are all great, and I think they all deserve a lot of love. A lot of these are already like super popular books. I'm not gonna share these in any particular order, but I am gonna save my favourite for last, like the top book of the year. But aside from that, these aren't ranked or anything. I'll start off with one that I read in the summer. This is Striga by Joanne Leica. Hope I'm pronouncing that roughly right. It's a Swedish author, and the book is translated from Swedish by Saskia Vogel. And this is published by Lolly Editions, which are such a cool publisher. They publish a ton of like really cool experimental European languages in translation. They published The Employees, which won the International Booker. This, for all of my like 2012 to 2014 Tumblr girls, like, you know, this is one for you. It's given like Picnic at Hanging Rock, Twin Peaks, The Shining. Like, this is the soft grunge, like gothic fantasy. I love this one. Like, I loved it. And that cover as well, just gorgeous. I hope it will focus. Yeah, stunning, love it. So it follows a young girl who leaves home to go and work a season in this grand old hotel. The hotel definitely has this kind of like gilded facade, but it's actually kind of pretty dilapidated behind the scenes. So our main character, who's called Rafa, is one of I think 10 girls who are working a season in the hotel, kind of like as housekeeping staff. And they develop this like immediate bond, and there's kind of this almost a feeling of them as a chorus. They don't quite have this kind of like we voice, but there's definitely the feeling that there is some sort of like unity between them. And the staff at the hotel are all a little bit strange. There's this kind of like simmering feeling of horror. A lot of like really evocative imagery, and there's something really unsettling about the hotel and the tasks that the girls are made to do. They're all kind of preparing for this big, I think it's a dance, some sort of big event that's going to happen at the hotel that's going to have a load of really important guests coming. But then the morning after the event, they realise that one of the girls has gone missing, and the book just kind of follows the aftermath of this girl's disappearance. I think fans of Sophie Mackintosh would really enjoy this. I suppose Sophie Mackintosh is a bit more dystopian, whereas this is a bit more horror. There was this kind of like hypnotic sense about it. I think it was just a mixture of like the kind of like lucid and lyrical prose, but then some really dark imagery that was like pretty disturbing. In the end, the book's kind of about social expectations on womanhood and what society comes to expect of young girls, and the options that are laid out for them. So definitely one for fans of translated literature, fans of stuff that's just got really like gorgeous poetic prose, and a good one to read if you're into horror and kind of like darker stuff as well. Next up is Fight Night by Miriam Taves, and I'm smiling because this one was just so special. It's really rare for me to have like an audible reaction when I'm reading a book. I'm normally pretty stony faced, but this one actually had me laughing out loud and crying within like a couple of pages. Miriam Taves takes subjects which should ostensibly make for really somber reading, but she just like imbues her writing with this sense of humour and like this kind of spark that makes it so bearable. Like, she takes what should be unbearable and she just makes it it's kind of like if you don't laugh you'll cry. That kind of feels a bit like this book. This should be a very sad topic, but this is one of the funniest books that I read this year. But while still honouring like the gravity of the subjects that she's covering, she's never undermining these subjects when she's dealing with them with humour. Because this book is a book about illness and it's a book about death, but she just creates the most funny scenarios to put her characters in, and there's this kind of like this deadpan narration, and I think it's because she gives she puts you inside the mind of really interesting characters. So the narrator of Fight Night is a young girl called Swiv. She is 9 years old, and I know a lot of people aren't fans of child protagonists, but I personally love them. And Swiv is a fantastic character because she's simultaneously wise beyond her years, but also incredibly naive, and she has been excluded from school for misbehaviour, and she is receiving sort of like an alternative education from her mum and her gran. The gran is an incredible character, one of my favourite characters I've read in a really long time. She's just such like a force to be reckoned with, like a real salt of the earth type. She's like really old and sick, and she has Swiv kind of acting as a carer for her. And Swiv's mum is really struggling with her mental health. She's going through a really severe depressive episode, and she's also pregnant, and she's single as well, so the father of the child is not in the picture. It doesn't exactly like paint the picture for a book that's going to be a fun read, but this book is so much fun because of how the characters interact. Swiv is a great character, and the relationship between her and her gran is just so special, and I think it's just about living a life on your own terms. They make for a bit of like an unconventional unit, but as like a little household, as a little family, you're rooting for them 100%. Next up I have Bliss Montage by Ling, and Ling is an author that I shared in my last top 10 reads video. She's the author of Severance, which is one of my favourite books of all time. So when I heard about Bliss Montage, I was so excited already. Like, this was one of my most anticipated reads of the year. This is a collection of short stories rather than a novel, which at first, I am a short story lover, but I was hoping for another novel from her, but luckily Bliss Montage didn't disappoint at all. I just had such a good time with this collection. She managed to pull together kind of like quite disparate settings and characters, but kind of unite them all under these sort of common themes. So the main kind of topics that she's looking at is ritual, expectation, toxic relationships, whether that's friendship or romantic, and the immigrant experience. Some of these short stories are quite out there, and some are grounded in sort of like a more real world setting. She's kind of making observations on contemporary pop culture, and just like Severance, her observations are so like razor sharp. I think sometimes by the time like contemporary pop references come to be actually like published in a finished book, they can feel a little bit outdated because, you know, they've been written like, you know, a year to 2 years previously. But somehow I feel like Miss Ma, she just stays ahead of the curve. She just seems to have this like sense of where things are gonna go, and, you know, has written something that feels so relevant and so fresh. And I just love that about her writing, because she's able to like simultaneously write something that feels like such an accurate social commentary, but also is like a really engaging story, and sometimes something that's really weird and that just makes you kind of stop in your tracks. And there are a couple of stories like that in this that are kind of abstract or like a bit eerie and unsettling, but as part of this collection there's just this like wonderful kind of cohesion to the book that just makes everything make sense together. The next book is definitely one of the longest I read this year. I gotta be honest, I'm not a huge fan of long books. I feel like for me to pick up a book that's over sort of 400 pages, it needs to be something that I'm pretty sure I'm gonna like. I'm much more of a short read girl, like, you know, 260 pages, great. 860 pages, not so sure. It's the Love Songs of W.E.B. DuBois by Honoré Fanon Jeffers. Let's actually see how long this is. 790 pages, so a bit of a unit, but this was great. I read this in a week, That's kind of unheard of because I'm not a particularly fast reader. Like I read at like a fairly standard pace, I think, and it's not like I had like tons of time to sit around and read this, but I was just so hooked. I was just so gripped, I just needed to know what was going to happen next. And when I say this is like an intergenerational narrative, like this is an intergenerational narrative. This is vast. It spans from like pre-colonial North America through slavery, through, you know, until the present day. Like it is expansive, and there are characters. Like there are characters. There's a cast of characters. This is one of those books that when you open it, it has like a family tree at the start. The family tree in here is like, it's like 4 pages long, and normally that puts me off. Normally I'm a bit intimidated by that, I think. Within the first few pages of this, I kind of knew that I was onto a winner because I just was so intrigued to see where the story was going to go. And I felt genuinely interested to see how everything was going to tie together. Like none of it felt contrived, which I think sometimes when books can jump timelines, or particularly when it's like the present trying to link with the distant past, it can just feel almost like too distant for you to really make a connection, at least for me. And I think with this, Jeffers has just done such a good job at making all of the stories feel so weighty. Like all of the stories felt important, and you know, different things about each timeline would kind of reveal itself from within another timeline, which I guess that's how these things work. But just the way that she pulled this together, this is like her debut. This is like a feat of literature to pull this off as your debut. The novel's kind of looking at it's looking at like a whole range of topics, but I suppose central would be Black experience, Indigenous history, the legacy of colonialism and slavery, and how like deeply entrenched those ideologies still are in the contemporary United States and rest of the world. There's some really heavy topics covered in here. There's like familial abuse. Obviously the sections on slavery are just devastating to read, and there's like, I suppose it's difficult to pin who exactly the central character would be, but probably it's a character called Ailey, who's one that we spend a lot of time with. There's a section on her sister Lydia. Oh my god, if you guys have read this book, how heartbreaking was Lydia's section. I had to like put the book down and just walk away after it. And I think it's a real testament to her skill that she's able to make you feel so strongly for so many characters. If you're looking for a chunky read, something kind of like Pachinko-ish vibes in terms of like the intergenerational like nature of it, then this is definitely one to check out. And even if you're not a fan of like long reads, I still think it's worth trying this one, because I think even though it is very like commanding of your attention and how long it is and how much is going on, in terms of theme, it's very worthy of your attention. So I think this is one that you should have on your radar if you haven't already read it. I know a lot of people on Bookstagram love this one, and I love like seeing people so excited about it as well. The next one I read right at the start of the year, but it made such an impact on me, and it's one of the most like striking books that I read. It's Luster by Leilani, and this one like blew up on Bookstagram, and for very good reason. This was incredible, just so sharp. I know that word gets like flung around a lot, including by me when like reviewing books and reflecting on them, but if I had to pick like, you know, one of the sharpest, like genuinely sharp, like I'm gonna cut myself on these pages sharp, it's got to be Luster. This was like a gorgeous read, and I raced through this because I just absolutely loved the protagonist. So it follows this girl called Edie who's in her 20s, and she's in this publishing job that she's really not enjoying. She has like really poor mental health, and she lost her mum to suicide and is still reeling from the trauma of that. She's kind of on this self-destruct mission when we first meet her. She's bouncing between all these unfortunate relationships and ending up with these kind of horrible men, these like unfulfilling one-night stands that are doing nothing for her self-esteem. Things kind of turn around when she starts seeing this older man. I should mention that Edie is like a young black woman, and the man that she meets is a middle-aged white man. who's in an open relationship, and she becomes pretty involved with him, and he's the first person who she is kind of seeing long term. And she starts like staying around at his house, and the relationship evolves quite quick. And yeah, he's in an open relationship, so his wife does know, and Edie actually ends up living with the couple for a while. And they're this kind of very middle class, like bourgeoisie, liberal intelligentsia couple, very like, you know, highly educated and cultured, and they have a young adopted daughter who is black, and they almost treat Edie as kind of like a mentor for their daughter, because she has nobody else black in her life. And so Edie kind of like steps up to being this kind of like sister figure to her boyfriend's daughter, which is obviously a really interesting dynamic. So like as a basis for the novel, that's like, you know, already we're off to quite a weird start. Leilani doesn't waste like a single page here. She's really like so keen in her observations of like the kind of like minor interactions these characters are having, and when they have dinner parties and the couple's friends come around, how they interact with Edie. And you know, these are people who would think of themselves as incredibly left-wing, educated to a very high standard, and are cultured in the sense that they would go to the theatre and watch documentaries and engage in discussions around art. So they aren't people who would think of themselves as being racist in any way, but you can still see how pervasive these ideas are, and just almost this kind of like moral outrage that these white people are kind of prompted into feeling when suddenly they actually are face to face with a black person in the home of their friends, and they don't know how to speak to her. And the couple don't know how to raise their black adopted daughter, so Edie is kind of the stand-in. It's about kind of how racism like underpins the structures that withhold the wealth of the middle class anyway. There's this kind of like self-congratulatory sense of like accomplishment of like, oh, I'm past racism because I watched the documentary or went to the art exhibition, and Leilani is just kind of like tearing that all down and just, you know, showing that that's really not what it's about. And Leilani is able to take this seemingly small domestic setting and use it to create a much bigger picture of racial and sexual politics in contemporary America. Like funny, subversive, just so smart. This is one that you don't want to miss. For fans of contemporary fiction, like popular fiction and literary fiction as well, because I think in terms of like the momentum of this story, I think that's really going to appeal to people who like something that's quite fast paced, but also the prose just like sparks off the page. So if you're into more like literary and experimental stuff, there's so much to enjoy in here as well. This is such a great all-rounder and definitely one of the best books I read last year. The next book is one that wasn't published last year. It is Mary Lou is Everywhere by Sarah Elaine Smith. I haven't seen a ton about this one online, but I know that a lot of people would enjoy this. It's a bit of an offbeat story. The prose is gorgeous and the plot is very strange. There's like a real moodiness to the prose, but then also this kind of like lucidity as well. It's set in the Appalachians, which I'm always really drawn to Appalachian set fiction. Mary Lou is Everywhere is definitely one that uses the setting in like a really major way, and there's like a real sense of atmosphere, this like heaviness in this like small community where the story is set. So the main character is a girl called Cindy who's 14, and she's like kind of like a wayward girl. Her mum is absent, so she's kind of being raised by her two older brothers who are like pretty boisterous and chaotic, so they're kind of like raising themselves and fending for themselves. Because of that, of course, like they're very poor and they have like very limited opportunity and, you know, not much going on in their lives. Cindy has this real fixation on another girl from their town who is older, and it's a girl who her brother actually has casually dated before. Her name is Jude, and Jude is this much more affluent, gorgeous, popular, mixed race girl. Cindy's white. Jude kind of is everything that Cindy wishes she could be. She just kind of has this like magnetism that makes people really interested in her, and you know, Cindy is very plain and feels quite forgotten, whereas Jude always seems at the centre of everything. Then Jude goes missing. She goes away on a camping trip with her friends and she doesn't come back. So suddenly the whole town becomes interested in Jude and what has happened to her. and the investigation ensues. And there's this sense of kind of like perverse excitement at the situation because you get the feeling that not much happens in this town. And in amongst like all of everything that's going on, Cindy becomes aware that there is kind of this space that has opened up, like the role of Jude is now, it's now empty. So Cindy ends up becoming close with Jude's mum, so the missing girl's mum, and she starts spending a lot of time around at her house. And it's clear pretty early on that Jude's mum is in some sort of state of cognitive decline. I don't remember if it's made explicit, but there's maybe some sort of like degenerative condition, or she perhaps has some sort of substance abuse issues where her cognition is not great and she's struggling with her memory and she's feeling very confused. And she starts to recognise Cindy as her daughter. And you know, Cindy is very happy just to kind of like slip into the spot that Jude has left behind. And so that's kind of where the novel starts to unfold. So it's a really interesting premise. It's a really weird book, but it just really captured me. And there's a couple of like plot points in particular that really had me like on the edge of my seat. The tone of the book is so interesting because there's a sense that something really dramatic is happening off stage, because of course Jude is missing and they're trying to figure out what happened to her. But the spotlight remains very much on Cindy and Jude's mum, who are like in this house together. And I suppose from Cindy's perspective, she doesn't want Jude to be found because she's happy in this new life that she's living. The writing in this is really gorgeous. Within the first couple of pages, it was already so clear to me that this was going to be a writing style that was really going to resonate with me. The book has kind of this quiet power. It's a weird story. This one I'm finding difficult to kind of like put into words. I think you have to go into this one like without knowing too much. Maybe I've already said too much, but it's a weird story, but very compelling. And one that definitely stayed on my mind for a long time after reading it as well. Next I've got one that I was like really eagerly anticipating because I've loved her previous work. It was Meiko Kawakami's All the Lovers in the Night. This is the most recent of her back catalogue to be translated into English. And I was really sure I was going to love this one, and luckily I was right. Meiko Kawakami is like one of my favourite authors. I just can't wait to like read more of her stuff. Like as soon as it's published into English, I just need to get my hands on it. This one was like a really tender and moving story. It still had like the kind of weirdness that I've come to expect of her books, but a lot less brutal than Heaven, which is like of course a really heavy read. This one almost had more of the kind of tone of Breasts and Eggs, which is one of my like favourite books. It follows a proofreader who I think is in her mid-30s called Fuyuko. And she lives in Tokyo, obviously this like sprawling megacity, but so much of the story unfolds inside her head. It's like a very interior focused story, and she lives kind of a lonely life. She does her work, she doesn't socialise too much. Kind of the highlight of her year is this walk that she goes out and walks at night every year on her birthday. She likes to walk at night because she finds like a real solace in the lights. And she has this real kind of preoccupation with like the beauty of light, and that's something that's always kind of playing on her mind. She doesn't take like a lot of enjoyment from other things, but she really looks forward to this this like birthday walk that she does at night, but she saves it. She only does it once a year. I always feel like with Kawakami's work, she deals with like isolation and loneliness in such an interesting way, because even though like due to the kind of like interior focus of this novel, you feel like close to the character, there's simultaneously this distance because they've isolated themselves so much from everyone else. They're viewing the world through this perspective that's a couple of degrees removed from how the reader's viewing things. So there's this like really interesting disconnect that I think creates like a really wonderful tension in her writing, because yeah, you feel close to the characters, but like not like you could reach out and touch them. There's like kind of this barrier that's kind of like inhibiting you from getting too close because you're not viewing the world in the same way that they are, and it's very apparent from early on that they have this very particular way of engaging with the world. And Fuyuko ends up being kind of pulled out of her routine by this chance encounter that she has with an older man who is a university lecturer who specialises in light, which obviously is like something that she's very interested in. So the two of them develop this really intense relationship very quickly, and it's kind of the first time she's feeling any real excitement for anything other than her walks. So it's kind of like her whole world has shifted on its axis, and now she's kind of propelled towards this new purpose, which is her relationship with this man. Kawakami's prose is just stunning, of course. The book feels intense and close and closed because, you know, given like the vast like city of Tokyo as a backdrop, the concerns of the narrative and of the protagonist are very small. There's a very narrow kind of like a narrow path that the story unfolds down, but there's just such a good tenderness in this like sense of like melancholy, which just makes this novel such a beautiful read. It's really sad, but it's just gorgeous, and I can't wait to read more Kawakami because her writing is just some of my absolute favourite. Another one of my favourites from last year was Vagabonds by Eloghosa Osunde, who's a Nigerian author, and this is kind of a collection of interconnected stories set in Lagos. Lagos features as a character in its own right. This is kind of like a gods and monsters story. This is like a really bold story of queer love, corruption, power, money. It's set against the backdrop of Nigeria's 2014 Same-Sex Prohibition Act, in which same-sex relationships were banned. The city of Lagos itself appears as this godlike character. The different characters that you meet throughout the collection, it's kind of a short story collection, but it kind of sits somewhere between like a novel and short story because the characters do kind of like thread back together. But they're all people who are living in Lagos, and then you have these kind of like god figures, where, you know, Lagos is a god. There's a god who represents power and money, and they have kind of like their lackeys who kind of like flip between the world of the gods and the real world as well. This is such a varied collection, and it's such a testament to Osunde's talent that they're able to write joy, passion, sadness, misery, tension, drama, you know, such a broad scope to this novel, and somehow they manage to just have such skill at writing every element of it. The dialogue is great, the artistry behind the prose is great, the concept is great. Everything about this novel, it just kept impressing me. It was like every time it came to a new chapter and a new character, a new storyline, I was just hooked all over again. There's a mix of magic, mythology, hyperrealism. So in each of the new chapters we're introduced to a vagabond, which is like in this context it's like a judicial label to anyone who is deemed sort of errant. And the vagabonds, it would be queer people or poor people, petty criminals, homeless people, anyone who's kind of seen as socially undesirable, but who in actuality is kind of like the lifeblood of the city and ever present. Really, they actually underpin everything the city is about. They're people who've kind of been chewed up and spat out by the city in a sense, but who are necessary for its survival. Next is one that I wish I got to a lot sooner. It's Zadie Smith's debut, White Teeth. I cannot even imagine how the agent who first read this felt when this like landed on their doorstep or inbox or whatever. They must have felt like they had struck gold. I've never read such a like incredible debut. To land on your feet as a new author with something like this, to have such like an authoritative and confident and unique voice like straight off the bat, that is like, I was like blown away by this. The plot is a bit complicated, so I'm not gonna, you know, unravel it too much, but basically it's following two different families, the fathers of which are old friends who met during the war, and this is years later, and now they are like in middle age and they have families of their own, but they've still maintained this friendship. And the book is set in London, and it kind of follows like the changing face of the city, and I suppose like the kind of changing demographic in London over decades, because this book does have a really wide span. The characters are fantastic. They're like quirky but weird, antagonistic. There's like a really great mix of like family drama in this, but then the book also pans out to look at much wider themes as well. So you simultaneously have this hyper focus on like the most like minute details of the day-to-day and social interactions and the relationships between these characters within the domestic setting. But then at the same time there are these like huge layered narrative arcs that just sweep through the whole story, and all the characters kind of like go like spiraling off in different directions. So you have this kind of like push and pull. Smith just manages to keep such tight control over every element of the story, and she's just made something that is just like an absolute joy to read. It's like weird and wonderful. The book kind of feels like a perfectly orchestrated chaos, and the characters, like, they're flawed, they're so compelling to read. Everyone is kind of wrangling with their own identity, as well as kind of navigating the relationship with others within the families between them, and then the book kind of like looks outwards as well. So it's a really sprawling story, and you know, this is like a chunky book. I had such a good time reading this. Yeah, it's just a wild ride. Definitely check this one out if you haven't already, and there's so much more Smith's work I need to read. I've also read Northwest and really enjoyed it, but I know that there's much more to dive into. Next up, we've got Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Did anyone else read Elsewhere by Gabrielle Zevin when they were like a preteen? Because I loved that book. In hindsight, it was kind of morbid, but I think all the best YA and children's books are, aren't they? This was so good. I read this when I was off work ill with like a really horrible head cold. It was like during that time when everyone was like the whole of Scotland was sick, and it was also like freezing as well, so I just was like lying on the sofa under a blanket. It says so much about this book that given the dire circumstances under which I was reading it, it's still one of my favourite reading experiences from last year, because I just got so sucked into this story. Going into it, because the blurb mentioned so much about the fact they met in a children's hospital, I thought the two characters were going to be children for like the whole book, and I thought it was going to be kind of like a Fault in Our Stars-esque deal, which I think is why I put off reading it for a while, because I thought it was going to be really sad. And the book is sad, but in actuality only like the very start of the novel is in the children's hospital, and we spend much more time with the like two protagonists through their time at university and like early adulthood. So they are like two best friends, Sam and Zadie, who met in this children's hospital when they were younger, and they're both super interested in video games, and that is kind of the basis on which their friendship is formed. And then they reconnect when they are young adults just going into university. They end up developing a video game together. I don't want to say too much, but they end up releasing this video game to great success, and the novel kind of traces what happens next for them. And this was such a great story. It had a perfect mix of like really great characterization, really interesting relationships, and I think it was so refreshing to read a book that paid so much attention to a relationship that wasn't a romantic relationship but a friendship. And there are a lot of parts of the story that point towards their friendship being quite toxic, and they definitely mistreat each other to like varying extents throughout the story. And I just think it was really nice to have a story about a friendship that followed its ebbs and flows. I love stories about really intense friendships too, but I think what was so like refreshing about this story was the way it followed the friendship as it evolved, and the different like kind of obstacles to their friendship, and how their friendship survived through, or didn't survive at certain points. The book looks at race and class and gender, and it's got two really great characters at its core, but I think that the kind of peripheral characters as well, and the secondary characters also were very interesting, and it was really interesting to see how their relationships developed. I got so invested in this story. I'm not super into video games. Like, I do like video games. Obviously, I've played some of the classics. Nintendo's DS, I'm thinking of you, and Yoshi's Island DS also. But even if you're not someone who's like really into video games, the book gives you enough that it's like very easy to understand what's going on, like the descriptions of like the industry and like the development of video games. I think there'll be a lot of like nice Easter eggs for you if you are someone who's into video games, particularly like retro video games. Yeah, I think there's a lot of like little like references that might you might pick up on if you are someone who is a gamer. But even if not, don't be put off by that, because there's so much more to the story than that. This one is so deserving of all the hype it gets. It was definitely something, it felt a bit different for me, but I was in the mood for something totally plot focused, and this just really gave me that. A lot of people will love this one. If you haven't already, this feels like an all-rounder. I would feel pretty confident recommending this to anyone after seeing the cover. Like, that just looks so gorgeous on camera as well. There's so much to recommend this book. Okay, I'm on my final book now. I have been talking so long that the light is fading, which is why the lighting is obviously totally different, but this was worth the wait. Maddie Mortimer's Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies. This is one of the best books I've read in my whole life, the type of book that reminds me of the joy of reading. I read this while I was on holiday, and it was almost like the highlight of the trip because I was just so excited to get to this book every day. This book is phenomenal. I'm gonna try and do justice, like some semblance of justice to describing it, but this book, if you read one book from this list, and like, you can make a mistake to only read one because there's some like great stuff here. If you were looking for something to like knock your socks off, if you're looking for something, this book pulled me into a different dimension, okay? I was aghast. I was crying. I literally have like a lump in my throat thinking about like the emotional impact this book had. This book is incredible. I don't even know where to begin describing this book. Essentially, it is about a woman called Leah who lives with her teenage daughter and her partner, and early in the start of the book we realise that she has had a recurrence of cancer, and the cancer actually ends up being one of the narrators of the story. The book is kind of like a map of a body and a map of a life. We follow Leah, you know, we kind of travel back into her childhood and follow the course of her life up until this point, and we also follow the cancer as it starts to grow, and it's this like malevolent voice that is kind of ever present. The cancer in particular has this really like mischievous, like devious, gleeful voice, and it gets like louder and louder, and the parts that are narrated by the cancer, they really play with like the typography. Like the actual structure of the book is gorgeous. Like, it's not a book that's you know, totally grim. There is like some absolutely like astonishing, like gorgeous prose in here. It's about desire, about motherhood, about faith. We follow her relationship with her parents, portions from Leah's childhood where she writes about a relationship she has with a character you get to know more throughout the book, and like the way that she's raised by her parents, who both have a really strong Christian faith. It's just, oh my god, there is so much just like beauty and pain. The book is raw, it's like incredibly clever, the wordplay is like fantastic. There's the way that they play with even like the format of the page and the text on the page. It doesn't feel gimmicky at all. It feels so necessary for the cancer to have a voice like that, and the way that it just kind of like spirals more and more. This is a debut by an author in her mid-20s. Unreal. I've been talking so long that the sun has literally set, so I think it's time for me to like wrap this up and go grab another coffee. But thank you guys so much for joining me for my recap of my top reads of 2022. I hope you guys also had a great year of reading, and I would love to hear what your favourite books were, and also what are you looking forward to for 2023, because I've got quite a lot of books on my radar, but there's always room for more, so please do let me know what you're particularly excited for, and I will see you next time. Thanks for sticking around.